Hi, welcome to the Dave Palmer Show. And with me in this episode, I have a professor of marketing, economics, and business strategy at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a faculty fellow for executive programs at Yale University. He's also president and CEO of Chestnut Hill Associates, a strategy consulting firm offering a suite of online executive development courses. His new book is The Carrot and the Stick, Leveraging Strategic Control for Growth. Dr. William Putsis, welcome to the Dave Palmer Show. Now, I don't know if is that perfect? That's good.
Absolutely perfect. Dave, pleasure to be here. I have one of those unusual last names. It's actually simple, exactly as you said it. This, but almost no one gets it right because it's so unusual. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, almost threw me. But I just said the two words separately, two syllables.
No, exactly.
So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm trying to get my head around your book. I did take a brief look at the Amazon free pages when you look inside. So, it makes sense looking at some of the stuff like, ecosystem rather than a platform rather than the product and stuff like that. So, looking at Zuckerberg and so they're great examples. Well, the first question I want to ask you is, what is the carrot and stick strategy?
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a longer version of a description, but
okay.
First I'll start with the big picture. So there are two elements of what firms do, and the first is the stick part, which is probably the more important part. The stick is something in short supply, something that you might be able to control. Back in the day, I'll give you a couple of examples, but back in the day, it might be a resource, a labor pool. Today, it's often data. If you own rights to the data, it can be, but something you can control that you can get extraordinary margins in a market. And I'll give you some specific examples in a minute.
Yeah.
The carrot is what we call vertically aligned incentives. It's a fancy word for having both your buyers and customers aligned with your own interests.
Yeah.
So sometimes there can be barriers to getting things done. If you're able to align incentives, you overcome those barriers. And when you put the two together, before I even really give you any details as to what they are, we did and present this in the book, a very detailed study of companies in the United States and in the S&P 500. So it is a US-centric research effort, and it was also focused on large companies, but companies that do well on both materially outperform those that don't. So for example, companies that did well over an 8-year period on both the carrot and the stick more than doubled their earnings, had a 70% share price appreciation, whereas those that did poorly on both actually had earnings decline over the same period. Yeah. So using these two strategies actually make a material difference in firm performance. Matter of fact, we did a statistical analysis, and 43% of share price appreciation over an 8-year period are due to 3 variables, 2 of which are the carrot and the stick. So it's pretty important. So let me go into, if it's okay, Dave, I'll go into a little more detail on both, because I love telling stories. I think they stick, they're of interest. And I'll tell a couple of stories for the stick, and then I'll tell one specifically about the carrot. And they're examples of what companies can do. So the first one with the stick goes back a while in the 1970s, and I'll give a more recent one. I always try and give these examples, Dave, of small companies and large companies, because quite often listeners are, anywhere from execs at larger companies to small little mom and pop shops on Main Street or startups. And so the first one is a startup in Minnesota. And it was a company that we now know as where we wash our hands, which we do a lot during a pandemic.
Yeah, of course.
Was a company called Soft Soap.
Right.
And Soft Soap was the first liquid soap that was mass produced. They had a small little niche product in the United States. It actually was, the name of the product didn't exactly roll off your tongue. The name of the product was Cream de la Soap on Tap.
Then why was it niched? Because soap is soap, isn't it?
Yeah. So the issue was that, when I was growing up, and Dave, I think I'm older than you. So when I was growing up, we used bar soap. It just hadn't become popular.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
And the liquid soap actually first was invented back in the 1890s, but no one had really gone national with it or international.
Yeah.
And so I still remember, liquid soap came out. It was like, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But so it was upper Midwest, small, and they wanted to go national with it.
Yeah.
And The issue they had in going national is if you're a small little player anywhere in the world and you start to go and get some success, the big players, the Unilevers, the Colgate Palmolive, the Johnson Johnson just come in and swamp you.
Yeah.
So they wanted to go national, but they figured if they were successful, the big players would eventually come and swamp them out of the market. So the question they had, and they thought, if I could keep the big players out for a year, I could ultimately be successful in the market because I can build enough of a brand presence and shelf space that even if the big players came in later, I'd be okay. So what they decided to do, they couldn't patent soap since, as I mentioned, it originally was patented back in the 1890s. The way they decided to keep the big players out for a year is they literally went up and bought up the world supply of pumps. Absolutely brilliant. And back then, there weren't that many products with the pumps, and so the pumps were at least feasible to buy up the world supply of pumps. The new players, when they came in, had to make a factory, come up with a formula, and that whole process took about a year. By the time the big players came in a year later, they had enough shelf space and allocation and brand presence that when the big players came in, they still were able to maintain about a third of the market. And a year after that, they sold the product to Colgate Palmolive to $1.7 billion. That's how you become a billionaire.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that the pump is the point of strategic control. They're not in the pump business, but if they're able to control that one critical supply and input, they can then leverage that throughout that value chain. And I'll give you a second example of a larger company. And this is about what the book is really about. The book, the first part is about what is strategic control, the stick, what is vertical alignment, the carrot. But the book is about how, in the second half, and more important, is how do you then extend it to other markets?
Yeah.
And the example I'll give, the second one for a strategic control point, or the stick in the carrot and the stick, is that of Google, Alphabet.
Yeah.
And I was giving a talk, and this is in the beginning, right in the beginning of the book, but I was giving a talk in the Latin American Summit in Miami. It was Yale had a summit that we were doing. There were three of us for 3 days running the summit. And I often talk about Google in a lot of these summits. And so after the break, right before lunch, I had an executive come up to me, and the executive came up to me and said, I hate Google. And I said, well, tell me why. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
And so he said, they're extorting money out of me. So I'm like, they're a publicly traded company. They don't do extortion, you would think. So what he said is they have data. 85% of the world's phones have the Android operating system on them. And even those that don't use Google Maps and Waze, both owned by Google. He says they know the location, speed, and habits of every driver in my home market. He was the CEO of the second largest insurance company in Latin America. His home base was Lima, Peru. And he says in Lima, they tell me driver one drives too fast, about 10 miles over the speed limit regularly. Driver two travels too close to the car in front of them. Driver three never stops at stop signs. And driver four obeys all traffic limits and traffic laws. And they want to sell me that information. So I can do a better job pricing my customers. And here's the kicker. He said, they're extorting money out of me because if I don't pay up, they're going to sell it to my rivals. And I'm now in a disadvantaged position in the marketplace.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, the data coming off the phones is that point of strategic control. They can get leverage. They can leverage that data coming off the Android operating system of Google Maps into another market. They're not in the insurance business, but they can get revenue from the insurance business.
Yeah.
And so if you're a small player fighting against a Google, if you're a larger player competing to gain market share, it's a critical component to gain leverage or fight back against companies who have it. So that's kind of the two examples, a large company, a small company of the stick. And it's funny, Dave, I had a very senior person at a client company who's become a good friend read the book early on. And he said, isn't this, it sounds to me like this is a blueprint to monopolize an industry. And I said, well, actually it is. It's the way Amazon, Apple, Google, now Alphabet, actually have dominated their industries. And so if you're a regulator, you need to understand how this is being played out if you're ever going to affect change in the industry. And if you're a smaller player competing, as almost every company in the world does, against an Alibaba, a Tencent, a Alphabet, a Amazon, you have to know these tactics if you're ever going to fight back. So that's the stick part, Dave, anyway.
Right. Okay. And the carrot?
The carrot, I'm going to give another example, which I like. And again, I always try to give small. This will be a large company example, but it's typified again with another story. And I spent, this is going back now 30 years, but I spent, tell you how old I am, right? 30 years ago, I spent the better part of a year at Procter & Gamble's world headquarters in Cincinnati in the States. And it was a time where they were setting up what has now become a famed relationship with Walmart.
Right.
And what they basically did, they did a lot of things, but first thing they said is they sent up what we now know as a key account system. They rented office space right next to Walmart's world headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, to keep this in mind, and this is happening a lot with retailers in Europe today. So although this is a 30-year-old story, it pertains to retailing today with Carrefour and Corte Inglés and other retailers in Europe, Tesco in the UK and others. And it's also, the story will be at the heart of what is now the strategy for the Internet of Things in the supply chain. Really big today. IoT is a really big area. And this is going to be what is the heart of what good strategy should be in those industries today. But what Procter & Gamble did is they set up this office space to better serve their client Walmart, who is doing about 1/3 of their business in the US. But that's inherently imitable. Your competitors can do the same dang thing. So what P&G did, which was brilliant, one of the best and most brilliant business moves in the decade of the 1990s, in addition to that, what they did is they went to Walmart and said, look, we don't want to just be your friend. We want to help you run your business more efficiently. Now, this is commonplace today, but back then it wasn't. What they said is, what we're going to do for you, Walmart, we're going to set up a jointly managed and run inventory control system. That every one of your stores is going to have a pre-specified stock level. And if the stock at that store falls below that stock level, we'll show up just in time to replenish inventory. So you Walmart never run out of inventory on Procter & Gamble products. But better yet, the benefit to you Walmart is, since you don't have to hold Procter & Gamble industry in a warehouse somewhere, and since we're going to show up just in time the loading dock of each individual store, your inventory holding costs on Procter & Gamble products will fall by about 60%. And it turned out roughly to be true. Now, today, most retailers in the world don't hold inventory. They're all mainly a consignment for most categories anyway, where the title of ownership goes from the manufacturer to you and I when it goes across the scanner at the store. But back then, Walmart, one of the most expensive parts of their doing business in 1990s, was holding inventory. So you're telling a retailer, I'm going to reduce your inventory holding costs on my product by 60%. Now think about what it does, and this is the key point for the carrot, as well as the Internet of Things supply chain strategies today. Think about what you and I pay a price at retail for the products we buy at whatever store we buy anywhere in the world. The retailer has a wholesale price that they pay to the manufacturer. Add on the cost of doing business for the retailer, back then including holding inventory, and what's left is the effective margin that the retailer sees on every product they sell. What just happened to the effective margin that Walmart saw on P&G products and P&G products alone, because their inventory holding costs just went down? The effective margins that Walmart saw on Procter & Gamble products just went through the roof. So what is Walmart's incentive structure after this is in place? Somewhat P&G products, somewhat P&G products. They want the Unilever products on the back shelf where no one can see them. I'm exaggerating a little bit. But P&G is now aligned the incentives of their number one customer, a behemoth called Walmart, to be perfectly aligned with P&G's interest. And better yet, P&G never has to even monitor what's going on in any agreements, because Procter & Gamble knows that Walmart will do what's in P&G's best interest, because it's in Walmart's interest to do what's in P&G's best interest. That incentive alignment is the key to the carrot. This example was a joint investment. Oliver Williamson called it, who won a Nobel Prize in part for his work in this area, asset specificity. Fancy term for a joint investment that aligns incentives. And it's that investment. And Dave, here's the key in the carrot, is that if you think about it, a lot of what's going on with companies doing various new ways of interacting using the internet and managing supply chain efficiently, the key is not finding a way to do a better job servicing your customer. The key is what happened here with Procter & Gamble, is that you want to give a differential cost for your product. What is it about what you put in place that gives you an advantage in terms of the underlying cost structure of your customer. That aligned incentives, I give many, many examples. I give one of windmills, which are going on as we speak, the use of data and the aligned incentives as maintenance on windmills and windmill farms throughout the world are using similar principles. And so two final notes on that story. One, I imagine there are many people listening to this and say, yeah, but wouldn't the competitors try and do the same dang thing? And the answer is yes. The competitors try to break in. As a matter of fact, I asked John Pepper, who was the CEO at the time, aren't you worried about that? And what he said was yes. So we're trying to fight them off of Walmart. And while they're trying to break into Walmart, we're launching it at every other retailer one by one to stay one step ahead of them. And they stayed one step ahead almost the entire decade of the 1990s. And so that was an absolute brilliant strategy. And to illustrate how this was indeed true, I had a work I did for a company called Aviol. They're an aviation parts supplier. And I'm telling this story in front of their CEO and executive team at the time. This is going back about 3 years now. And he said, that's why they did that. I didn't know it, but he was the head of Walmart supply chain back when this was going on. And he was being told from Bentonville, Arkansas, the headquarters of Walmart, P&G gets preferential treatment on everything. If there's not enough space in the truck, P&G goes out, everything else stays behind. And he didn't know until I told that story some 20-something years later why he was being told that back in the day as to why P&G was so important. And today in the book, I give many examples of how companies are aligning those incentives. And again, to go back to the carrot and the stick, it's when you put the two together where the magic really happens.
Yeah, well, certainly lots of competition going on there. One of the things that the big question really I want to ask is, obviously we're in an era of disruption. So how could these companies outperform competition in an era of disruption?
Yeah, great question, Dave, and it's an important one, especially today. And if you think about it, I always think and the way I try and write when I write the books is I always think about the audience. If I'm listening, I like to think about, well, stories are entertaining, they make it stick. And today I think about, if I think about the story of soft soap, I can't buy up the world supply of pumps today. It seems like it doesn't apply yet. Large companies like Apple tried to monopolize the sapphire glass a number of years ago. Didn't succeed. Cobalt is another one in short supply. The company's country strategies. China and Xi Jinping are trying to get as many of the raw materials throughout the world and source them as a point of control that can be used politically. So it transcends markets and economics. But the disruption area is a really important part of the book. So I have an entire chapter, what I call 7 strategies to overcome others' points of strategic control. And the vast majority, I imagine the listeners aren't going to be at Google, Alphabet, Alibaba, or some of the large companies throughout the world that may have points of strategic control. And they would ask, what do I do to fight back? And the amazing thing about today is that strategic control is harder and harder to hold. So I'll give you a couple of examples again. Till a few years back, there were actually 3 companies, 2 merged, and one eyeglass now conglomerate based in Europe owned anywhere between 75 and 85% of the eyeglasses market, depending if it's contact, eyeglasses, sunglasses. It varies somewhere between 75 and 85% of the world market under many different retailers and many different brands, one company. Now, how do you, and by the way, the strategic control there were retail. So you had all the establishments throughout the world. How do you disrupt a market like that? Along comes companies, and not just in the US, but throughout the world, like Warby Parker. They ship it to you direct, you try it on at home, you never have to go to a store. In the middle of the last year with the pandemic, that becomes all the more important. In the United States, we have Dollar Shave Club and Harry's, who went direct for men's razors to overcome a near monopoly in men's razors by companies like Bic and others. So the use of the internet and alternative distribution means as a way of disintermediating and in turn disrupting the market is becoming much more commonplace. Technology is sometimes the vehicle for doing that. The problem is often there's not enough for a small company to be able to overcome. So we end up what I call the unanticipated consequences end of this. So as a bit of a side, Dave, I haven't quite fully answered your question yet, but I always look at in the United States, we had, my son says, Dad, you remember this, you're so old, you remember it. It was back in 1840s. He jokes with me. we had the gold rush here in the US.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's quite a famous well, they made lots of films about it and things like that, haven't they? Really?
Yeah. So the people would be on the East Coast of the US and literally would sell their life savings to finance a trip out to the San Francisco and the West Coast to pan for gold. Most of them went bankrupt and they never found any gold.
Yeah.
The only person, well, there are others, but one main person there's still a street named after him in San Francisco. His name was Sam Brannan. The only one who consistently made money from the gold rush. You know what he did? He sold the pickaxes to the miners who eventually went bankrupt. He sold overpriced supplies and food to the people who eventually went bankrupt. I call it what happens, the principle of the wake, what happens behind the boat.
Yeah.
So what we often want to do when we think about disrupting a market is don't focus on how do I compete directly with a Google or Apple or any large company, because that's often a recipe for disaster. How do I find what's happening behind the technology to overcome it? So I think about, companies like Airbnb, Lyft, and Uber in the United States. They found an industry that was being underserved and were poorly serving their customers. Taxi. You and I talked earlier about London, with the exception of London. Love the London taxi cabs, and so that's an exception. But in the United States, many underserved markets. And so if you start to think about how you disintermediate, often you can use a different technology, a way to circumvent what companies are doing, maybe do an alternative distribution. For example, I mentioned windmill briefly before. The lock on the vast majority of market share in the windmill market is held by three companies, one Chinese company, and then Siemens and General Electric. And there are companies now that are lower priced alternatives. And part of what happens with large companies is they provide these data services that give you better uptime through predictive maintenance. So they send data off a windmill up to the cloud, and they monitor it so they know when there's an impending failure. And only big companies who have those analytic skills can traditionally have done that. That's why they have such a large market share. Well, a couple of companies come in and put sensors on the windmill for free. So companies don't have to spend any money to get the same monitoring service. And then they monitor all of the non-big three players in the marketplace, and so they can gain the same scale. So you get a lower price. Much of it is from much of them, the manufacturers are based in China, exporting particularly to Western Europe, are now able to provide the same service of GE or Siemens at a much lower price point. That's another way of thinking about how we disintermediate. How do we do what companies do differently using the market that's been developed by some of the other large companies effectively? And the notion of disintermediating a market often transcends boundaries. So for example, with this windmill, Dave, think about what you do now. This company has come up with a sensor. And what it does is on a windmill, if it vibrates too much or it gets too hot, that's a signal that you have an impending motor failure. So you can take that, and what GE does it on locomotives, on a diesel lorries or trucks, depending on where you are in the world. And so you can translate that to other markets. And what I talk about in the book in terms of developing an ecosystem is the analysis. And I actually walk through an 8-step process for how do you do the analysis to find out where the strategic control points lie? How do you do that 8-step analysis so that you know where those vertically aligned incentives may be misaligned? Number one. And then once you develop that, what are the adjacent markets that you can go to? You can leverage what you have in one market, like Google did in the insurance business, into another market, so you create an ecosystem where you're getting margins, profits, and growth from multiple markets, not just one.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot going on at the moment. I think really more the tech giants are really, since the lockdown, it's more a lot going on with that because that hasn't been affected really so much. But what other businesses do you think are really sort of at an advantage with this disruptive kind of
Yes,
situation we're in at the moment?
another important question. And so I'm gonna come at it from a slightly different angle. And again, I'll tell a story because I'll actually do a little bit of why I tell stories. I'm in London. You'll appreciate this. BBC Two.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do, but they used to have on Sunday mornings an hour-long program with an expert from a
Right.
British, usually academic, which
What
explains.
we used to have the Open University. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but they generally
Yeah,
have
I think
those.
so, yeah,
All right. Okay. Well,
yeah,
that's a long time ago, but yeah.
yeah. It's probably not there. I haven't lived in London in 20 years, so
All right. Okay.
go
There you go.
back.
Yeah. It would have been then. Yeah. It would have been on
Yeah,
then.
and it was great because you would go on. Happened to wake up early one Sunday morning.
That's it. Yeah.
The guy by the name of Sumantro Ghoshal, he's since passed away. He's a colleague of mine at London Business School, and he was on TV. I turned the TV, and he was on. I said, "What's he doing
Yeah.
on TV?" And it was an hour-long session on. He was explaining what business strategy is. In
Right.
the first 40 minutes of this talk, Sumantro was talking about a walk in the woods in Fontainebleau, where INSEAD, where he used to teach, was located. I'm like, what is he doing? 40 minutes? I don't want to hear about walk in the woods. I want to hear about strategy. But the result of that 40 minutes is he then made a connection to what business strategy is. And to this day, I remember the story. To this day, I remember the connection. And I often argue that's why stories are so powerful. You often don't remember the point of the story, you remember the story. And they say,
Yeah.
oh, that's why
And it's
he did that.
engaging if it's told in the right way, isn't it? As well.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a preamble to the story I'm about to tell. And this story is one, again, another one. It's the Yale CEO Summit in New York. And this is, to me, the lesson, and we'll go back to your original question. The lesson for this will be a Google story, but it's a lesson for non-Google, not anyone who's not at a big company and trying to fight back. I'm in this room, and twice a year, they've been virtual the last few, but they'll go back to being in person, and they're always in person twice a year. And this was in New York. They held, moderated by a colleague and friend of mine, Jeff Sonnenfeld. And in the room, there were about 250 or so business leaders throughout the world. Prime Minister of Australia has been there the last few. We had Joe Biden in the last one. CEOs, mostly CEOs and business executives for large companies, mostly US, but throughout the world. And a handful of academics. I'm lucky enough to be one of them that gets to come and occasionally comment. And I'm in the room, and one of the people in the room was Larry Page. Larry Page, at the time, this is December 2017, was still CEO of Alphabet and co-founder of Google.
Right.
He since stepped down as CEO.
Yeah.
But it was the impact, the discussion in this room amongst all these business leaders is, what are you going to do with the money that you have outside of the United States if you were to repatriate those profits back to the US under a lower tax structure? And in front of 250 of his colleagues, he asked Larry Page, who was in the room, Larry, what are you going to do with, I think it was 38 billion, I forget the exact number, but say it was $38 billion of cash. Were you to bring it back to the US, what would you do with that money? And, I'm thinking artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital security, IoT, all the buzzwords, cryptocurrency, whatever it may be. You know what his answer was? Traffic lights. I'm going to solve the traffic light problem.
All right. Okay.
I'm sitting in my office, and this is almost a direct quote. I'm sitting in my office in Mountain View, and I'm looking around, and the people sitting in a light, no one's moving. They could be at work working. I want to fix the traffic light problem. I called the town of Mountain View and said, who's responsible for traffic lights? They said, no one. We just contracted out to subcontractor. I want to solve the traffic light problem. Then twice in the next 10 minutes, Jeff asked him two other questions that had nothing to do with traffic lights. And both of those, his answer was traffic lights.
All right.
Now, the reason why I tell that silly story is he wasn't thinking about traffic lights.
Right.
He was thinking 8 steps ahead. He was thinking, in a world of autonomous interconnected vehicles, we don't need traffic lights. And all the repercussions that happen as a result of that. Think about it. If we have interconnected vehicles that are able to interoperate, talk to one another, and autonomous, we've actually built too many roads in most parts of the world.
Right.
And the reason why we have traffic congestion in major cities isn't that we don't have enough roads and too many vehicles, it's that we use them really inefficiently. People drive too closely and have to hit on the brakes, or there's accidents, or
Yeah.
if vehicles could kind of move and just miss each other, but miss each other, go into intersections, we're just fine.
Yeah.
And he's thinking of all the things that would follow in the wake of that. So the idea there is, if we have autonomous vehicles, we don't need as many ambulances or tow trucks anymore. The emergency room will have less accident victims. So A&E demand will go down. We'll need less emergency room doctors.
Yeah.
He's thinking about all of those things, kind of like the gold rush example I said before. And so if I'm a small entrepreneur thinking about how I use any of the things in the book or any of the things I talk about here with you, Dave, it's I'm thinking about what do I do to take advantage of the technology that others are producing. And that is the real key, because I mean, it's not, I talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening in fintech and banks allowing access to the back end, the APIs that have enabled fintech, but they're doing it very concertedly. They're doing it in ways that advantage the big banks. Think about your markets. What are the holes or the void that's created as a result of that new technology, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly one of the things that people always try to get around is not reinventing the wheel. But, people do get carried away doing that, really. But, we could go on and on about a lot of things, but we'll move people onto the book and where they can find it. One of the things before you tell them more about that is at the end, it does say this book is applicable to all industries and the book can help alter business outcomes. That's on the Amazon page. So you could probably briefly explain how it can do that and then tell them where the book can be found. Yeah.
We'll do, Dave. So I'm gonna do the first part of it by again, a little side story, a short one. My son, when he was in high school, started a nonprofit business called Business Resource Organization.
Yeah.
And he had a neighbor who went bankrupt because they invested in a small business and didn't have expertise or resource to do it. And so he founded this organization so we can connect. It's since been disbanded because he went off to university and did all his other stuff. But the goal was to take the principle of the carrot and stick and apply it to the pizza shop that was about to go bankrupt. So if you have a small little or large restaurant, what is the point of strategic control that you own? Is it the chef? In many industries, there aren't that many top-end chefs that you can leverage. Often it's location. What is the location that gives you a unique advantage or disadvantage in your individual markets? The second part of it is think about all the infrastructure around you. So you're in a town in the high street or a main street somewhere, and you have all the different businesses around you that all have the same incentive as you do to bring things together and bring people off the tube or the underground or the subway to bring people to that location. How do you align everyone's incentives so that individuals will come to that small location, whatever it may be? Yeah. And so the principle of carrot and stick can be applied on a very micro local level. And the way you have to think about doing it is it's not as grandiose as trying to control the internet. It's much more local. It could be a location. It could be a brand. It could be a chef. It could be the friendly person that you know. It could be the person with the unique expertise on heating and cooling systems in the local area. I had a company that I worked with, a small little company, a startup, that the person was an expert on corrosion of little nuts and bolts, as we call them here. And so big companies wanted him in hot demand because he could make this part fail less frequently by having a different corrosion system. And that's all he was. He was one person. And that point of strategic control was his expertise. Yeah. So the idea of applying it from Main Street to, especially with startups. And then I'll tell you about finding the book and everything else. But the one thing I look up for startups, if you're going to invest in one, they should have usually they don't have a point of strategic control to start, but they should have a vision of a point of strategic control. And quite often that's scale. the
Yeah.
math. So Facebook doesn't own anything. They just have the worldwide network of people that are Facebook members.
Yeah.
That can be a point of strategic control. So
Right.
think about the point that you start a business. Where can you find any of this? So I'm going to send your listeners to two places. The
Yeah.
easiest way to just start is if you can spell my last name, it's putsis.com,
Yep.
Putsis. And the other, which is probably the best place, which is all encompassing of everything I do, from blogs to education and online courses to access and links to the book,
Yep.
is Chestnut Hill Associates. It's one word, Chestnut Hill Associates, which is
Great.
my main consulting firm.com.
Sure.
And so
Well,
there's literally no spaces, don't have to worry about caps or lowercase, chestnuthillassociates.com. And the two books that really get to the heart of this are Compete Smarter, Not Harder,
Yep.
and The Carrot and the Stick. And they're available online in any, pretty much throughout the world. It's available in Spanish, and I cannot repeat the name, Compete Sabiamente, something like that. I've
Yeah.
messed up Spanish. So it's only available in those two languages.
Yeah, excellent. Well, anyone listening, they can also find the links to those two websites that William just mentioned on the show notes. So you can always refer back to that anytime you want, and get straight to William's work and books and everything. Well, William, it's been a great pleasure for giving this really enlightening vision of what the business world is like out there, during these disruptive times as well. I certainly learned a lot. In terms of that, and also I'll never look at a carrot and stick in the same way I used to before. So thanks a lot for enlightening us and coming on the show, speaking to my audience today.
Dave, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Great questions. I've enjoyed our conversations. Thank you.